Okay, let us start the class. In today's class, in Python, we will try to understand how to create the thread counters. Okay, topic is what? Thread counter. This thread counter, it will be part of semaphores and bounded semaphores, even though in logs also. Okay, this is the inbuilt thread. It is a inbuilt counter. It is an inbuilt counter. It is an inbuilt counter. Inbuilt counter. For what? Inbuilt counter. For log class, log class, comma, semaphore class, and bounded semaphore class. Bounded semaphore class. Okay. So this counter, what it does? So thread counter. So it is inbuilt counter for log semaphore and bounded semaphore classes. So as we have discussed in the Friday and Saturday classes, normally what happens in multi-threading concept. So multi-threading means what? Many threads will be executed at a time. Multiple threads will be able to execution at a time simultaneously. So that moment, threads, we can't predict that which thread will be executed first. So to control the threads, the synchronization process will be there. Okay. So if multiple threads are trying to access the data, shared result. Data means shared resources, any printout statement, any for loop, a while loop. So these are the data. So multiple threads trying to access that moment, maybe somewhat at a time, many threads maybe try to share the data. So that moment, synchronization process will be followed. Synchronization process, within that only one thread will be permitted to execute. That is synchronization. So in the time of synchronization process, so acquire and release methods of log class. Okay, initially we try to understand about the log class. That is what here three or four points we need to understand. One is that synchronization. Already we have discussed. That is what before that multi-threading. Okay, we try to understand multi-threading. Okay, so then after in multi-threading, synchronization takes place to control the threads. So at a time, one thread will be executed. That moment, this log class we have studied about the log class. Log class has two methods. That is what log class has acquire and release methods. So after that, in the Friday class, we try to understand semaphore class. Semaphore class and bounded semaphore class both have the same acquire and release methods. So in log class, whenever we try to understand log class, that moment, acquire and release methods we have used. Within that, what happened under the log class, one thread will be permitted to access the resources in log class. So after one thread, Banu, are you getting my voice? My voice is clear, Banu? Getting voice or not? Banu Prakash? So, so that moment what happened? This log class has two methods, acquire and release methods. So log class will allow by these methods, we will be able to access one thread at a time. Okay. By semaphore class, we can restrict the here. I am writing here by log class. Okay, by log class, we will be able to only one thread at a time. Only one thread by log class. Only by log class. Only one thread. Log class. Only one thread will be executed. Executed at a time by log class. So what about that semaphore class? By semaphore class and bounded semaphore class and bounded semaphore class. So we will be able to control the restrict the number of threads. Number of threads. Okay. Number of threads. We have studied in the previous class, okay, on Friday and Saturday classes. So by semaphore class and bounded, by log class, only one thread will be executed at a time. Simultaneously, at a time, only one thread will be executed by these acquire and release methods, okay. So by semaphore and bounded semaphore class, we will be able to restrict the number of threads, okay, means out of 10 threads are created. So we can restrict 3 threads only will be able to access the resources. Another way is that we can restrict the resources to the resources. Here in this line, we can restrict the threads. Number of threads. Out of 10 threads, only 5 threads or 3 threads will be permitted to access the resources. In this line, I am explaining that we can restrict the resources per threads. So here in this meaning of what is the meaning of this line, we can restrict the resources means if a print statement is there. So if you want to print, if we have used for loop to print the print statement 10 times, but that print statement can be restricted to only 5 times. The threads can access only for 3 times. So means we are restricting over the resources here. Here threads are restricted to access the resources. Out of 10 threads, only 3 threads will be permitted to access the resources. Here the resources means any print statement, any statements written in for loop. So that resources will be restricted for the threads. So this is we have studied in semaphore class and bounded semaphore classes. Okay. But under the log class, only one thread will be executed at a time. So now try to understand what happened in SEM. What is the difference between now? What is the difference between try to understand the difference between semaphore and bounded semaphore. Okay. So try to understand difference between. Then we will create the counter. Now difference between difference between semaphore class and bounded semaphore class. This is what. So not normally what happened, I told you that both have the internal counter. So in semaphore class, what happened? In semaphore class, the counter can be the counter can be raised raised above the initial value. Initial value. Understand? So in semaphore class, the counter can be raised above the initial value. Suppose counter initial value is equal to 5. So in semaphore class, that counter initial value will be above the initial value, can be raised. So how the initial value will be raised above the initial value, how the counter will be raised? By releasing more threads. So once thread is released, if a thread releases a method, so counter will be incremented. So if threads are releasing more release methods, so counter will be incremented. Okay. Whenever thread acquire the method, counter will be decremented. So if in semaphore class, the counter can be raised above the initial value, means more release methods will be released by the threads. If a thread is releasing one release method, so counter will be incremented. Okay. So that is happened. So in bounded semaphore, what happened? In bounded semaphore class, when the counter value the counter value can't be raised to above the initial value. Okay. So in bounded semaphore class, the counter value can't be raised above the initial. If the initial value is equal to 5, so above the initial value, the counter can't be raised. So when the initial value will be raised, so by releasing of more threads, if the threads are releasing release methods, so every thread will release the lock by release method. So that moment counter will be incremented. So whenever counter raise it to above the initial value, so it will give a error. Okay, it gives an error. So this is somewhat theory I am explaining here, but practically we need to understand all the things in practically. Okay, how log class the thread counter for the log class declared. So that moment only one thread will be permitted to access the resources in semaphore class. How can we restrict the resource threads, and how can we restrict the resources for the threads? All we have seen in previous Friday Saturday class. Now today I want to create a counter. So how the counter functions for this all the classes. Now try to write the code for the that is what your counter. So first of all, I'm going to create a that is what a counter. Okay, a thread counter. So class. So first of all, import threading module. That is very important. Threading and comma time. Okay, both you import both the threading and time modules. Then after a class, that is class is what threading counter. Okay, so this class name is thread counter. Huh? This class name is thread counter. So then after the class, we need to terminate with the colon. Then after you come down here. So here you create a constructor for this class. The constructor is called def keyword. Start with always this is the constructor. Okay, this is the constructor. Okay, the constructor. So after that constructor, that is to be terminated colon. Now come down here. So now within this constructor, suppose if you don't want to create any statements, you need to put a past keyword. Otherwise, if you run this, it will give error. Okay. So it is untitled. So you need to save. First of all, you go for my PC. I have one drive only, and within this VS Code Python. Okay. Now put a file name. This is called counter. Okay. Thread underscore counter. Okay. Dot py. Py is very important. You save this. Now your file will be thread count underscore counter. So now what is happening here? So nothing is error here. Okay. So CLS clear screen. If you compile this code, so you are not getting any error. It means you have put the pass keyword. So whenever your constructor declared, this is called the constructor. I want to comment here, constructor. Okay, this is the constructor for this class. Okay, syntax is what? Def keyword. After that, this double underscore in its. This is called sometimes underscore method. It is a method. Okay, normally the constructor is what? Special method. Special method. Sometimes it is called underscore method. Underscore method. Underscore method means what? Double underscore. These are double underscore. That's what double underscore. So its role is to its constructor role is to update the class variables. Suppose this thread counter is a class. It has a variable that is class variable like what counter. Counter is a class variable. Its initial value set to 0. It is a class variable. Okay, I'm commenting here class variable. Okay, now to update this class variable, so this constructor we will take the help of this constructor. Okay, now within this constructor, I need to create a parameter that is called loop within this. Now this is class variable. So now this constructor, sorry, counter. This counter is a local variable declared in this constructor. I told you that constructor is a special method. So whatever the variable you declared inside, this is called local variable here. So now what happened? We need to write self dot counter equal. This is the syntax. VS Code helps a lot. Okay. Why we need to now remove this pass? Because we are writing the if you are not writing any statements that moment, you need to put the pass. Otherwise, self dot counter is equal to counter. So what is the meaning of this one? So try to understand. This is the class variable. So now class where self dot counter is equal. This self parameter always refers the class variable. This the counter is the class variable. This counter is called local variable. So whenever your class variable and local variable are same, so that time we need to use the self keyword. Okay, it is clearly self keyword indicating that this counter is class variable is equal to this counter local variable. So in Java we will use this keyword in place of self. Okay, so now how this class variable will be updated by Okay, I will explain how. Okay, now here, you come down here. Now what happens? Self dot counter. So here one more function. The function is name is equal to count. Function name is equal to count. I told you that. So whenever it is a function, but it is declared under a class, so it is reasonable to call this as a method because this is declared inside of a class. So now it is a method. So this is called count method. So after that we need to terminate with the colon. Okay. Then okay. Now come down. Within this we need to this count method. What it does whenever whenever thread acquire this method, acquire the method of acquire any method, so that moment it will increments, counter will be increments. Okay, now self dot counter. Okay, so this is okay, but question is what, whenever self dot acquire is there, self dot acquire. So self the dot acquire method is there. So whenever we call self dot acquire method, that moment what happens? I told you that the counter will be decremented. So it is called incrementing of the counter. No? So I want to put minus here. I want to put what? Minus. Okay. So now the counter will be decremented. Initially counter value is equal to set to 0. So the counter will be decremented. So before that, we need to take either counter log class, otherwise semaphore class, I am boundary, because all of these have the counters. Okay. So first of all, you declare one, that is what here you need to declare the object for the object for what? Object for what? Object for any class. This is the now syntax is what? Syntax to create an object. I told you that syntax to create syntax to create the object. What is the syntax to create an object? To create the object for a class. For a class. Okay. Now we want to create the object for which class? Either for the log class, otherwise semaphore class, otherwise bounded semaphore class. First of all, why we want to create because these three will be used in thread synchronization. In thread synchronization, I have differentiated all of them. What is the role of the log class? Whenever we use the log class, that moment one thread will be permitted to execute. Okay, semaphore class. So there is somewhat restriction for the threads. So out of 10 threads, 3 threads may be permitted as per your wish. And bounded semaphore same. Okay, now come here. So this is as I told you that syntax to create the object for a class. Syntax is what? First you need to write what? Syntax to create the class. First of all, object name. Object name is equal to class name. Class name. And class name must be terminated with the parent brackets. This is the syntax. Okay. Now, as per that syntax, I have an object name. This is lock is the object name. Okay. And is equal class name. So for which class I want to create the object for lock class. So after that parenthesis. So for this lock class, I have created the object. The object name is equal to lock. you can keep any x, y, z, it doesn't matter. So now object is created for the log class. That object, the class, that is what this class has two methods, not only log class, and even though semaphore class and bounded semaphore class, they all have two methods, that is acquire method and restrict, that is what acquire and release methods. Where is that methods? Acquire and release methods. Okay. Now these two methods can be accessed by only creating the object, either by they can be accessed, that method can be accessed by creating object, means object methods, means public methods, otherwise class methods. Without creating the object, they can be accessed as a class method. But here we need to access them as a object method. So that's why object created. Huh? Okay, now come down. So now here self dot acquire. Then what happened? Try to understand that. So self dot counter minus is equal to 1. So here self dot will not be used here. Here that is what log, because object name is equal to log. So log dot counter is equal to -1. So then what happened? So here try to understand. So whenever this count function calls the self dot acquire method, so that time your counter will be decremented. Counter will be decremented. So once counter will be decremented, so it, suppose we will write a printout here, printout statement. So within that printout statement, I want to keep some statement like what that is what counter decremented, counter, okay, decremented, counter decremented. Huh? So here we will use that is formatted text. So why formatted text, I will explain. So here in this here, so this must be a self parameter, and then one that is what counter, now count number, okay, thread number, okay, that is very important, thread underscore number, okay. So this is a parameter I passed in this def count function. So self parameter compulsory. So after that, this is one parameter I have passed. Now this parameter, it takes what the thread numbers, which thread is being executed, which thread is being executed. So now here you put flower braces within this thread underscore number, you pass that. So that number will be dynamically added here, okay, dynamically added. So counter decremented, okay. So why it is giving error? Intermediate expression of f string. F string. Okay, this is to be terminated no? Here, because you have opened the brace, so you need to terminate here. That's why it is unterminated expression in f string. So it is to be terminated with the brace. Okay, now it's okay. Now what happens? So you remove this one brace. Okay. Now what happened? This thread number will be dynamically automatically inserted here. After that, counter decremented to what? Here you need to keep what? This what? You need to access. So now self counter. That is what whenever we have called this method. So